without further ado, really, I'd like to get started with Mark and introduce Dr. Mark Loewen as our first keynote speaker. Dr. Loewen is a paleontologist here at the Natural History Museum of Utah, but also a speaker, or also a faculty member in the Department of Geology and Geophysics. And he's worked on a wide range of dinosaur paleontology and other types of paleontology as well, but is most known, I'd say, for working on meat-eating dinosaurs as well as horned dinosaurs. So all those great questions we just heard about meat-eating dinosaurs are right up his alley, and I'm sure we'll learn a bit more about them as well today. And so we're really excited to have Mark here in person to start off DinoFest this year with his talk, Dinosaurs in the Flesh. Take it away, Mark.
Thank you, Randy. So again, like Randy said, we have an amazing lineup of people who are going to talk about a lot of cool things, all related to our theme, dinosaurs in living color. I chose to have a boring first slide just to let every one of those other speakers top me. But at the same time, I doubt they can handle my shirt. So I went with shirt, not slide. But yes, I'm going to be talking about what we know about dinosaur flesh. And it turns out this museum has a world-class collection of soft tissue preservation from dinosaurs. So let's talk about it. But before we talk about it, we have to talk a little bit about the history. So what do you think was the first interpretation of soft tissue in a dinosaur? I don't know, but there's actually a footprint in southern Utah in which there's a dinosaur footprint, and right above it, there's something that you would interpret it as a thunderbird interpreted above it. This is from about 2,000 years ago. Probably wasn't exactly a thunderbird because that's a northern Lakota Sioux type creature, but somehow the Fremont First Peoples identified this track on the ground, realized that it was some giant bird-like thing, and interpreted that on the rock. In Western science, our first evidence of integument in a dinosaur comes, unsurprisingly, from the Solnhofen limestone, in which a German paleontologist in 1820 said that there's some feathered fossils from there. Of course, they're lost to science. So then we move to New Jersey, and this is the first illustration of a dinosaur with skin. It's literally interpreted the impression of the skin of an animal's foot. Now keep in mind, we now know that this is a footprint that we call Eubrontes. Tomorrow we're going to have an amazing talk all about footprints and what they can tell us about things. But this is the first interpretation of soft tissue in an animal. But the interesting thing is dinosaurs did not exist when this was reported. The next year, Sir Richard Owen actually named dinosaurs. So the first two examples of dinosaur integument probably come from before we have dinosaurs. Then, of course, in 1859, Chuck D wrote this book called The Origin of Species. But in that book, he says the lack of transitional fossils or species is probably the biggest argument against my theory. The very next year, this feather was found in those same Solnhofen limestones in Bavaria of Germany. So now we have evidence of soft tissue from dinosaur ages. Guess what we found the next year? I say we. I mean the royal we of science. Archaeopteryx. So now we had a bird. Didn't understand that this bird actually was a dinosaur at the time, but now we do. But then really, within meat-eating dinosaurs, there's a big lull all the way till 1990. And in Argentina, Argentine paleontologists dug up this really cool dinosaur called Carnotaurus. And as they were prepping the face, they started to realize that they had skin preserved. So this reconstruction of this animal is actually very, very accurate as far as, recently a paper just last year was published redescribing all the skin. We have skin from all these different places, but likely the entire animal was covered with skin. And this is a recurring theme. I cannot tell you how many dinosaurs out there that have been dug up that were covered with skin impressions that just were not caught at the time. So Carnotaurus. Well, the next big story in dinosaur integument starts in 1996 when this dinosaur was discovered and described. I remember when it was first reported here in Salt Lake City at the Salt Palace at the Geological Society of America meeting. There were over 1,000 people in the room. Everyone was skeptical. And certainly one of our other talkers will be talking about dinosaur feathers. I'm not going to get too much into feathers, but we know a lot about feathers. We absolutely know that many dinosaurs had feathers. But I recently published a paper, literally this year, with some of my colleagues in which we go through all of the instances of non-feathered skin in meat-eating dinosaurs. So I'm going to give you some of the highlights of that research and then tie it into some of the stuff that we have here at this museum. One of the first things that we can talk about is probably my favorite dinosaur. It's in my top two. Ceratosaurus is a cool meat-eating dinosaur. It has the absolute longest, sharpest teeth of any meat eater ever. It has a nose above each eye. Sorry, it has a horn above each eye. It has a horn on its nose, but it also has osteoderms from the tip of its head all the way back down the tail. And we have these collected right here. So we have one of the two best collections in the world of these skin bones that are growing in the skin of Ceratosaurus. This is literally the largest and biggest mount of Ceratosaurus in the world. And you can see, look at the shadow on the wall, all these awesome osteoderms. This is my favorite mount in our exhibits. Now, you can have a different opinion, and you're right too. But this one's so cool because if you look at Ceratosaurus and then you turn across the walkway and look at Allosaurus, you will notice they're so different. Ceratosaurus is such a unique and cool looking dinosaur. It's really one of the highlights that we have. So you can ask, what did the skin of Ceratosaurus look like? Well, it's actually very closely related to Carnotaurus. So it's possible that it could have had skin patterns similar to Carnotaurus, but almost certainly something similar down the back of the animal. So another group of dinosaurs that we talk about in our paper are the tyrannosaurs. So tyrannosaurs, there are lots of tyrannosaurs. So we have a group called tyrannosauroids, and these are what we would think of as the early tyrannosaurs. They live in the Jurassic and the early Cretaceous. We know that they have feathers, but we're focusing on skin. So if we actually come to North America and the true tyrannosaurids, we have found skin from the belly and the tail of both Gorgosaurus and Albertosaurus. So we know a little bit about that. Turns out we have some tyrannosaurs here too. Anybody seen this specimen, these specimens? This is Teratophonius, right? Then we have another specimen of Teratophonius that maybe over the last few years you've watched emerge from our prep lab. This is one of the coolest specimens we have at the museum. You know, lots of sharp teeth, really cool animal. And the cool thing is, we now have skin, not from this individual, but from a different quarry called Rainbows and Unicorns. You may have heard of that quarry, but this is what the skin looks like. And it's very, very similar to that skin that you saw from Albertosaurus and Gorgosaurus. So it's kind of boring, but this reconstruction in which you can see the different scales on the body, so far, we have no evidence of feathers in these early tyrannosaurids that are working their way up to becoming, you know, the iconic animal that T-Rex is. So of course your next question is going to be, and we already got it, what about T-Rex? Well, what about T-Rex? Turns out we actually have quite a bit of T-Rex skin. T-Rex does come from animals like that Tyrannosaur I talked about in China that has feathers from the tip of its head to the back of its tail and also on its legs. But these are the different places where we have definitive T-Rex skin. T-Rex right here, a very close relative called Tarbosaurus, both from footprints and then on the side of the tail. And then we have Tarbosaurus up here on the side of the animal. So we actually have quite a bit of evidence of scaly skin in T-Rex. And I know this is disappointing. It doesn't mean that small T-Rexes wouldn't necessarily have had a little bit of downy feathers, maybe along the back, maybe along the top. It's a possibility. But what we can say for sure is that T-Rex had scales. So now the big debate is what's happening on the face, and is there covering for every tooth? So it turns out in modern animals, no animal that has enamel on its teeth, which is every animal, actually keeps them exposed all the time, right? So we have lips keeping our teeth from drying out and cracking. Crocodiles live in the water. But other things like lizards, they cover their teeth with some sort of covering. You know, lizards don't have the facial muscles that we do that can move around, but almost certainly T-Rex would have had some sort of lip. We'll come back to that. So that's another one of the new things. So unfortunately for me, I love the aesthetics of every T-Rex skull that you see out there. Right? Every single one of those T-Rex skulls that you see is mounted with all of its teeth disarticulated. Right? You'll see where the dark enamel ends and then the light enamel begins, all sticking way out of the socket because it looks much more fierce with these big giant teeth sticking out of it. So not only do they need to put the teeth back where they actually belong, and when you find an articulated skull, you will find that the teeth actually are not protruding as much. You know, what we saw with this animal, that's much more realistic. That tooth is about to fall out. But the question is, how much of this upper jaw is actually covered to keep the teeth dry? And that's a question. Okay, so we've talked about T-Rex. What else do we have? Anybody familiar with this animal? This animal is awesome. So this is an oviraptorid that we found in southern Utah. It's a composite skeleton, but it's based on the hand and foot that we actually found in Grand Staircase Escalante National Monument. This animal would have been covered with feathers. Its name is Hagriphus, and it's one of the stars of our collections. At the same time, the hand was preserved with soft tissue, specifically the fingernail covering the claw. So we have the claw sheath preserved, made out of keratin, along with the actual bony claw. So just another example of soft tissues preserved in some of the dinosaurs that we have here in our museum. Who is this? Yeah. Okay, this is our state dinosaur now. So this is Utahceratops. This is a cast that we have on display along with a few other bones. You may not realize this, but up until recently, the world's largest collection of possible Utahceratops material was at Brigham Young University from the Dry Mesa Quarry, or from the Dalton Wells Quarry in central Utah. Recently, Jim Kirkland went out with the team from Dirty Jobs and got the world's biggest jacket ever jacketed off the side of the hill. And this jacket seems to be full of Utahceratops specimens. They all belong to us here at the Natural History Museum of Utah, but the jacket won't fit inside the door. So slowly they're being prepared out. But there's everything in here from adult Utahceratops-sized animals all the way to tiny, tiny, tiny little individuals. So this is embargoed and we don't want you sharing this too much, but there are little tiny animals that have been prepped out of there like that. Yeah, wow is right. That's a tiny little baby. And guess what else is in there? So this is a project that one of the undergrads here at the University of Utah, Rachel Jorgensen, is working on. And just this last week, Randy got it micro CT scanned. So a lot of the research is still going on this, but hopefully we'll have something really cool to present to the public in the near future. So pretty cool. Okay. Well, now I'm going to get out of the theropod world and bore you to tears by going to the plant eaters. So I'm not showing any of my biases here, am I? So you may have been to our exhibits. You may have been brave enough to venture out onto this glass floor and seen this skull of a hadrosaur. This is a Griposaurus, one of the different species of Griposaurus. Connected to its neck is this giant waddle of skin underneath its neck. Nobody ever does paleo reconstructions. The artists don't really draw this because it's really ugly. But this thing had a big waddle of skin underneath its neck. We don't completely understand it. But this animal was just known from a skull and a neck with some skin. We also found another animal, which is focused underneath that floor, which I'll talk about in a minute. Sorry. But we have a baby hadrosaur. We're not exactly sure what species, but do you see that weird soft tissue preserved right there? That's something in its gut. We call it belly skin. I think of it as the greater omentum. I don't think it is. I don't think it's internal skin. I think this is something, one of the soft tissues inside the belly. Because we actually do have enough skin from the belly of hadrosaurs that it shouldn't look like that. But it's something, and it's bizarre. But also we have lots and lots of skin from the main specimen that's underneath the glass floor in the collections. That is an articulated tail with vertebrae and skin. And even better, the skin has very, very specific little, I call them butterflies. They're like ridges. There's these festoon scales going down the back of the animal, which is pretty cool. Definitely for display. So they're completely different than the background scales, and they do go along the spine tops down the back of the tail. So stuff is going on with this animal. That's really, really cool. We thought we'd learned a lot about it. When we started building this building of the museum, we wanted to mount this hadrosaur. We weren't sure exactly how we were going to put the skin into the mount, but we wanted to mount it, but unfortunately we didn't have any legs. And in Grand Staircase, one of the BLM personnel actually came across a huge set of legs sticking out of the side of the hill. So the decision was made, yeah, let's go get those legs so we can mount this hadrosaur. We had a head, we had a body, but we didn't have any legs. So let's go dig up the legs. So we went to a famous quarry called Horse Mountain Griposaur, and we dug up this animal, which is actually way more complete than anything we had before. So we went after the legs, we got an entire animal. But guess what else we ended up with? The thing is just covered with skin. And in fact, if you look carefully at this animal has a copy of a different head on it. Its head is painstakingly being prepared at the Royal Ontario Museum in Canada because it is covered with skin. The entire animal is just covered with skin. You see skin everywhere. Eventually, we're going to learn a whole lot about the facial skin of hadrosaurs from what's going on. It seems like we even probably have eyelids on that specimen. So that's why we're going so slow. Well, that's one of the reasons why it's going so slow. So pretty cool. So unfortunately, we think about these things like mummies, but it turns out they're not mummies. They're getting rapidly buried in streams in a situation like the Bayou of Louisiana, in which rapidly moving water covers these animals with sand, and their really thick, leathery skin allows them to be preserved. Let's ask Randy what he thinks. What percentage of articulated hadrosaurs from Grand Staircase actually have skin preserved with them? Yeah, right. So, yeah, if you want to dig up a duckbill in Grand Staircase, be ready to get the skin as well. Okay, let's go to another of my favorites. Obviously, I like ceratopsians. So the focus, if you look at the ceratopsian wall, who's the most important animal on this wall? Well, of course, this one in the middle, the Utahceratops, right? This is one of the stars of our collections. The Utahceratops is awesome because it actually has skin. And we've known a little bit about ceratopsian skin. Some stuff was found in the 20s. Some stuff is being found about Triceratops. But this specimen has different skin than any other ceratopsian ever found before. So we have both impressions or part and counterparts of the skin. But what's really interesting, do you see any patterns here? Do we have any geometry students here? What patterns do you see? I see 2 geometry patterns here. Yeah. Absolutely. Circles and triangles and circles and triangles and circles and triangles. That's what I think it actually looked like. Now, being more specific, I would say hexagons and triangles or soccer balls, right? So it turns out we have skin like this in life. Same thing. I would interpret the skin that we had on this animal to look more like this in actuality. And it's a very specific kind of skin on a very specific kind of animal. This is what the whole background looks like. And what it is, it's located just on the arm of Utahceratops. So that's pretty cool. And when we go back and look where the modern skin is found, it's also found on the arm of an animal. It's specific to the arms. Anybody know where we're going? So therefore, ceratopsians could change color. No, that's not what I'm saying. But you know it's coming. But chameleons have this specific pattern of hexagons and triangles in the movable parts of their skin. And we're suggesting that ceratopsians have the same thing. And there's some evidence that there's not that pattern in other parts of the ceratopsians, more like this. Coincidentally, this is also chameleon skin. And where do you think we find it? On the frill. So present is the key to the past. And there's some functional constraints on different kind of scale patterns, which we're really getting into because we're trying to reconstruct the facial skull of a new ceratopsian that we're working on. And so these have been some of the models. So awesome dinosaur, awesome dinosaur. Now, if you want to see this dinosaur, it exists now in the Jurassic World, Jurassic Park franchise. There's a movie called Battle at Big Rock. So it looks really cool and you think you're seeing T-Rex, but really you're seeing two animals face off in the forest. And one of them is Utahceratops. Utahceratops is fighting with this animal. Anybody know who that is? Anybody seen Battle at Big Rock? Allosaurus. Allosaurus. And you know, hilarity ensues. So you'll have to look it up. It's not very long. But what's interesting is this is the animatronic Allosaurus that featured in that short film. So it got me to thinking, you know, what about Allosaurus? You know, Allosaurus is an iconic dinosaur. We know more about Allosaurus than almost any dinosaur out there. So what do we know? Well, it turns out Natural History Museum has the world's best collection of Allosaurus. We just named a new species of Allosaurus in the last couple of years. So in looking at this, how do we get from this to soft tissues in Allosaurus? So you probably were wondering why I was skipping Allosaurus. Well, I was saving the best till the last. So we have a way in which scientists can use a special scientific method to look at soft tissues in animals where there are no soft tissues. So for instance, we can take something that represents one of the ancestors to dinosaurs or is closely related to the ancestors of dinosaurs. We can look at the descendants of dinosaurs and we can look at their anatomy and then we can infer that anatomy onto extinct animals. We call it the extant phylogenetic bracket method. So literally, if I want to know about Allosaurus or T-Rex, I could look at crocodiles and birds. So for my dissertation, about 12 years ago, I actually did this. And it turns out you know a little bit more about anatomy than you think you do. What is this? A turkey leg. Can you go any further? What part of the turkey leg? The drum. Right. Where is your drum? It's not your thigh, it's your shin. Okay. You'll be hard pressed to find a turkey thigh. It's all buried up in the top of the turkey. This is the drumstick, which is literally the tibia and fibula. You ever get that little toothpick bone out of a drumstick? That's the fibula on the outside of your shin. So, yeah, we can take what we know from eating drumsticks to the actual anatomy of a bird or a crocodile. And this has been done by some of my colleagues for both, you know, chickens and crocodiles, and then taken to T-Rex and looked at where on each bone does every muscle start and end. And we can pretty confidently map where the muscles go on T-Rex. And then I did that for Allosaurus. Literally, you can see the scars on the bones for each one of these muscles. So I'm going to go through and name each one of these for you in another life. Instead, we'll just paint them on. So hind limb musculature of Allosaurus. It's going to look something like that, right? Pretty cool. So now we can get the shape of Allosaurus. But then, you know, how have you seen Allosaurus imagined in real life? You know, here's different ideas about what Allosaurus might look like. What can we actually say? So in this paper that we just published, we published two specimens. One is a maybe, and the other one is a for sure about what the skin of Allosaurus looks like. So here is a section of skin from the tail of an Allosaurus in Switzerland called Big Al2. So kind of see, this is a really tough one. Then this is a section by a rib from a little baby specimen that we have casts of here in the museum. The specimen is a member of Allosaurus gymnadsoni, and this is literally what all the baby Allosaurus that are attacking the giant Barosaurus downstairs in the collection are made up of. So it's a dinosaur you know very well. But it had skin right there. So if we go close up, I can tell you what the skin on the side of a baby Allosaurus looks like. Are you ready? Like that. Are you excited? So what did a baby Allosaurus look like? A basketball. I was crestfallen. So the rest of this talk is secret, unpublished stuff. So don't share this on social media, so on and so forth. But my students and I are working on another project on another specimen of Allosaurus. And it's not as boring as that little one. So from the Jurassic Mile Quarry, which is a famous quarry on the border of Montana and Wyoming, being worked by the Indianapolis Children's Museum, this amazing specimen of Allosaurus was found. And when they took it out, it was demanded that they keep all of the overburden, because anytime you have a connected, articulated skeleton like this, you just might have skin. So the Utah Geological Survey has been out doing LiDAR and photogrammetry. Rio Tinto has been out doing photogrammetry on this as well, with some results.
Are you able to determine the pigment from those scales that you recovered?
No, but there will be a talk this afternoon that will suggest what those pigments should be. So yeah, I think that's the next real, you probably already know that we can tell what color some feathers were because the actual color pigments are still preserved. I think that's the next frontier, is getting that information out of skin. But I don't have that information. What else? Yes.
That if crocodilians don't have lips, does that mean most aquatic dinosaurs don't have lips either?
How many aquatic dinosaurs are there? According to a paper that came out this week, just two. And that would be Baryonyx and Spinosaurus. Same time, what's really interesting is if we go to crocodiles. So crocodiles have a special bone surface texture on their faces that go along with what their faces look like. That's actually lost, and well, it's actually not present in some of the early lineages of crocodiles that we actually know were terrestrial, and they look more like dinosaurs. So it's probably the fact that aquatic crocodiles, because crocodiles were never invented to be aquatic, there were these giant monsters in the water that were related to crocodiles very, very distantly. But the phytosaurs said when crocodiles evolved, you can't be in the water. So all crocodiles were terrestrial, am I right? At the beginning of crocodile evolution. So it was only that when crocodiles went into the water, they evolved this facial structure that did not need lips.
What is the reason why Spinosauruses have such big frills?
So have you ever been snorkeling? Okay. Well, I've been to places where people snorkel, and sometimes they give them a big orange vest that blows up in the back so that the boat captain can see where all the snorkelers are. So some people have suggested that the big sails are so Spinosaurs can keep track of each other as they're snorkeling along to catch fish. I don't know. I think certainly it's something to look really cool, which is usually the answer we give for any bizarre structure in a dinosaur. Who's in charge here?
So in your last slide, you say that's the most accurate depiction of Allosaurus we have?
We're working on it.
Is there anything else you can say about the lip debate?
So I think it's real. I hate it because it doesn't look right to me, but it's totally true. You wouldn't have teeth just hanging out there exposed without drying out and cracking. And, I don't see dinosaurs licking their teeth every 5 minutes. So yeah, they're probably more like varanid lizards and things like that who keep the maxillary and premaxillary teeth wet by covering them up, unfortunately.
Have you found evidence of shedding? Like modern reptiles will shed their some of them, like Uromastyx, will shed their full skin. Have you found anything like that with dinosaurs?
No, but we have found snake and lizard skin here in Utah, about 50 million year old, in lake beds, just like the lizard skin floating along, multiples, so like probably 5 or 6 lizards shed their skin and all their skins floated along and got preserved. But haven't seen it in dinosaurs.
Is it true if you don't move, a T-Rex can't see you?
I'm not taking that chance. T-Rex has binocular vision. Animals with binocular vision can see a lot more than movement. Right?
Was Allosaurus more related to a bird or a reptile?
Much closer related to a bird. So,
Oh, okay.
yes, Allosaurus is not a bird, and there's more time between T-Rex and you, or there's more time between Allosaurus and T-Rex than there is between T-Rex and you, but Allosaurus is closer related to a bird than it is to a lizard.
So are there any structural changes in skin in dinosaurs earlier in their evolution, or like towards becoming closer to birds? Is there any distinct changes in dinosaur skin over time?
It's complex, right? We still don't have complete pictures of dinosaur skin, even though, on a couple of these animals, we're learning a whole lot. Then there's the fact that some of the scales on birds are actually modified feathers, which gets even more complex. And so we don't know, we can't do embryology on T-Rex scales. I don't think that they're modified feathers, but all feathers and all scales are modified scales. So I don't know. It's complex.
Where do you find yourself on the new thought process between Tyrannosaurus Rex being split into 3 different species?
Again, so I'm absolutely convinced there's more than one species that some people consider T-Rex today. I wouldn't even be surprised if there's 3. But 2 of the newly discovered ones, I'm not convinced about. Is that cryptic enough?
I get what you're saying.
Go ahead.
Did the baby three-horned Triceratops eat meat?
I don't think so. But if a bug crawled in its mouth, it probably ate it. So maybe baby Triceratops ate ladybugs accidentally.
Is there any evidence of different and varying diets other than just piscivore, carnivore, and herbivore, like preferred food?
There's some really interesting things, right? So if we actually look at fossilized dinosaur poop, coprolites, it looks like animals that have T-Rex sized poop, which could almost certainly only be T-Rex, they're full of bone. So it seems like T-Rex was ripping off chunks of animals and eating them whole. Like if somehow you got into the stomach of T-Rex, it's probably so acidic in there that you would just melt, kind of like Indiana Jones style. So really nasty, small digestive system, but what they're producing out the other end is chunks of bone. At the same time, some hadrosaurs seem to be eating dead trees, maybe to go after the moss and lichen and fungus that's in the tree. It's confusing. So there's definitely variety in dinosaur diets, but again, we don't understand enough.
Did horned carnivores use their horns to fight their herbivores for eating them?
It doesn't seem like horned carnivores actually use their horns to fight. I think that they use them more to intimidate rivals and impress mates. We don't really have injuries. Carnivores were much more likely to face bite each other than they were to use the top of their heads to attack each other.
What type of diet do you think would have been more healthier for a species of dinosaur, herbivore or carnivore?
It depends on which one you were, right? So giving hay to a T-Rex is going to die. Giving mice to a ceratopsian, probably not the best thing either. So it just depended. Again, you see all these things in Jurassic Park living in, Kauai, Hawaii. There's almost nothing in those ecosystems that these dinosaurs would have been eating. So I still don't know how you are the ecological dietitian of Jurassic Park or Jurassic World.
There's one question from online, and for those of you watching online, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. You kind of answered this when you were doing some informal Q&A before your talk, but since not everyone was here, maybe it's worth addressing. Is what is the evidence? Sorry, let me read this more carefully. Is there soft tissue evidence that speaks to whether dinosaurs were warm or cold-blooded?
The only animals with feathers today are warm-blooded. So many dinosaurs had feathers. Same time, if you're a warm-blooded sauropod, as a big guy myself, I will tell you, you don't want to be wearing a fur coat during the Mesozoic. So, feathers work great as thermal regulation. Personally, I'm convinced that feathers did not evolve for thermal regulation. Instead, they evolved for display because of where we find them. Top of the head, back of the tail, on the arms, coming off of the sides, in multiple groups of dinosaurs. Those are adaptations for display, to impress mates, intimidate rivals, those sorts of things. That's where I think feathers came from. And then eventually, feathers became co-opted for other reasons, sometimes thermoregulatory, maybe, sometimes for flight, eventually.
Do you have
impressions of the skin with the feathers coming out of it? Because I've seen the scales and then feathers, but I haven't seen skin with the feathers coming out of it.
There are some.
There are some.
Yeah.
What does it look like? Or
Feathers coming out of feather beds. I mean, more of it is where the feathers end and the, like one of the most famous feathered dinosaurs is Anchiornis. It also has one of the most famous arrays of skin on it. I didn't talk about it today because we don't have one of those in our museum. And, it might be the topic of another talk this afternoon. But, we have exquisite foot pads and legs and arms and, stuff called patagia on the arms from those specimens. So that's the best place where we have a mix of really, really good feathers and really, really good scales.
All right. What are your thoughts on the idea that ceratopsians could have been opportunistic scavengers? Like if they came across something dead, they'd eat some of the bones for extra calcium. What are your thoughts on that?
So the stomach of a ceratopsian is no different from the stomach of a stegosaur or an ankylosaur or a duck-billed dinosaur, in that they have parts of the pelvis tucked way back, so they have a giant rotting chamber. To me and most paleontologists, that is consistent with eating vegetation. Now, again, if a rat crawls down a ceratopsian's throat, would it have eaten it? Absolutely. Could it have digested it? Maybe partially. But I think the major part of a ceratopsian's diet is going to be coming from the flora around it. But that's my speculation.
I'm going to try to explain this and not explain, but ask this in a clear way. Have you heard the plucked chicken theory of fossilized skin impressions?
Yes.
Okay. So what is the likelihood of skin impressions being preserved with no traces of feather, even if they were present in life? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So, are these dinosaurs going down the freeway at 80 miles an hour on the top of a convertible, getting all their feathers blown off, and then you find it? I guess, we do have dinosaurs that we think were killed in hurricanes. Would that blow the feathers off? Sure. I don't know. Most of the cases in which we have skin, it's rapid burial right after death. And I tend to interpret it as skin and not, the absence of feathers doesn't mean it didn't have feathers, but until you have feathers, you can't say it had feathers. How about that?
Is the Allosaurus hatchet head theory still a thing? Would it still hunt like that, or has it changed?
Allosaurus is built as one of the best generalists of its time. It's living at the same time as Ceratosaurus, which is a very specific skull architecture. It's living at the same time as something that's more the size of a Tyrannosaur, but super, super rare in Torvosaurus. Allosaurus seems to be the best generalist. Allosaurus can use its head. Allosaurus can use its arms. Allosaurus can use its legs and its speed to hunt its prey. And over time, Allosaurus gets better and better at biting off chunks of animals. So the second species of Allosaurus has a much stronger skull that could rip bigger chunks out of something. So, no, I've always had a problem with the hatchet attack style.
I noticed on your super secret Allosaurus, it does not have any feathers. Did you not include the feathers because you do not believe they were there, or because there's no fossil evidence for them?
Both. So I really don't think Allosaurus had feathers. If it did, they were along the back of the neck. But so far, like within the group Allosauroidea, they don't seem to have feathers. Could they have had feathers? Yes, feathers evolved before that, but it doesn't seem to be a group that has feathers so far.
Thank you.
So quill-like feathers have been found in Ceratopsian, which is a basal ceratopsian. So what evidence of feathers do you think might be in later ceratopsians?
Yeah, I get that a lot. So the things on Ceratopsian, they are display structures on the tail. Could that have been in Triceratops? I don't know. Triceratops actually has this weird scale pattern in which they have big polygonal scales about like this. And then interspersed about every foot or so on the side of the animal, there is a volcano scale. It's a peaked scale. And those have been suggested as maybe having a quill coming out of it. But at the same time, until somebody thin sections those, I don't think we can really interpret them. They're peaked scales. That's all we can say for sure. But it might be possible that filaments could come out of that. But who knows? We just need to find another specimen.
In your research, have you observed differences in the soft tissue between male and females? In birds, you see a lot of those differences between males and females. And if you're postulating that feathers are largely for display, have you found any evidence of skin differences in males and females?
I have not. I don't really study feathers. I'm aware of them. So that would be a question for somebody who's going to talk about feathers later. But I have not seen any. We see different patterns in hadrosaurs, sometimes within a same formation, but we're not to the point where we can say those are males and females. So I absolutely think that you could tell species and sexes apart within the hadrosaurs based on what's going on with their skin scales and patterns. But you would need entire bodies of multiple animals to prove that, which is our problem now.
Do you think that Allosaurus could have hunted in packs?
Yes, but like lots of different dinosaurs could. Right now, our best evidence of being in packs is with tyrannosaurs, because tyrannosaurs are found together. The place where a bunch of allosaurs are found together is the Cleveland-Lloyd dinosaur quarry in central Utah. I would argue there are way too many allosaurs, and you should vote for bloat and float because they got killed upstream, and I can't tell you why they're all together. I actually do think they're all together because they float in a similar way. So they're hydraulically sorted as balloons, and that's why you get so many allosaurs at the Cleveland-Lloyd dinosaur quarry.
You briefly mentioned a new ceratopsian that might be getting named. Could you tell us anything about that?
So we have 6. So we have the oldest one from Grand Staircase. Its nickname is McDonald's Ceratops. We have one from between the Wahweap and the Caperowitz Formation. We call that Pizza Crust. They're both distinct from anything else out there, and they're going to get names hopefully this year. There's another one that's about the same age as Pizza Crust. We call that the Spider. And then there's 2 from Montana that are distinct as well. So yeah, we're working on lots. And then there's another one from there are 2 more from the Caperowitz that have not been named yet. So we have Caperowitz taxon B, and then we have Caperowitz taxon C. But I mean, we have 6 skulls. So we know all about it. It's just having the time to sit down and write it up.
We're not going to let Mark leave the museum till he finishes those papers.
That's right.
Today. So we need to wrap up the Q&A as so that we can get ready for our next speaker. But there's one last question from the chat, which is not directly related to your talk, but since you do good answering wildcard questions, I'm going to throw it to you. What makes scientists think that some dinosaurs were killed in hurricanes or tropical storms, things like that?
Yeah, I brought it up, so fair enough. So during the Cretaceous, starting in about 100 or 90 million years ago, the Caribbean Sea connected to the Arctic Ocean. Hurricanes happened in the same way during the Mesozoic. I would argue even more in the Mesozoic than now, because hurricanes are fed by water temperatures. And water temperatures were higher, certainly in the oceans of Kansas and Nebraska. So every once in a while, maybe every 1,000 years, hurricanes could travel up the seaway, keep strong, and hit the western provinces of Alberta. And literally some of the bone beds of Hadrosaurs and Ceratopsians in Alberta have been interpreted as being killed by storm surge from these 1 in every 10,000 year hurricanes that traveled up the seaway.
Great, thank you. Let's give Mark a round of applause and thank him again.